Hi everyone, welcome back. This is somewhat of an emergency podcast. We wanted to call it just because of everything that's been happening in Syria over the past week, I suppose, since the 27th of November. So there's a lot to talk about on this. A lot of the other podcasts we listen to have been doing really in-depth analysis of the situation. So we thought we'd give that a try. And then we also want to look into how the Labour Party is showing in the polls in Australia and how the nuclear debate is
Hotting up.
Is heating up? Yeah, exactly. So do you want to start us off?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good to be back here with you, Freddie. Yes, haven't things moved quickly in Syria? In a matter of days, the country has been liberated, in some people's words, and the Assad regime is no more. If you include himself and his father, they've been in power for about 50 years, or just more than 50 years. And Assad and his family have escaped to Russia.
No big surprise that considering their significant financial backing and political support.
That's true. It isn't a surprise, but not the most ideal place to be in exile for them. Not that anyone's feeling sorry for them, but that will be interesting in its own regard, that whole scenario. And the other big question, I think, is, will Russia be able to maintain its naval base and its air force base in Syria? That's the real question.
What I've heard about that so far from Al-Jilani, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce his name, he has apparently said that he's willing to retain the Russian bases within the country and willing to form a better relationship with Russia. I don't know how successful that would be, obviously, because Russia's not going to be that amenable to this new leadership, but they have said that they're willing to cooperate because they want to achieve some level of peace within the country. You know, it's very cautious, the word peace. We don't really know what that means. There's still significant areas of the country held by other groups, such as the Kurdish forces and some remaining government forces. So we're going to see how that plays out. But what do you think Russia's response to that would be?
Well, I think they'll be open to it, but I think it's interesting that the regime, the prime minister, remember the president and his family have escaped. The prime minister is still there, and he was saying they wanted to help manage a peaceful transition to the liberators. And he's been taken away under gunpoint to the Four Seasons Hotel in Damascus, where he is. So I'm not sure how worried he is. But that's interesting that there hasn't been a lot of bloodshed with the takeover. And of course, the horrific thing is this terrible prison in Damascus where they're trying to liberate the prisoners, and supposedly there's prisoners underground and all sorts of things and in cells, and it's pretty horrific.
That prison, wasn't it one of the key takeaways from the Assad regime of the horrifying capability which they have when they're in power? Because, you know, when Assad was first put into power, people were really optimistic about him, right? He had a lot more ties to the West. He studied at an English university. He's
an ophthalmologist.
He's an ophthalmologist, and he had this whole love story, this romance. And in a way that a lot of
the English wife,
with an English wife, yeah, and who still has an English citizenship, in a way which a lot of high-powered figures in this world do not have such links. So that's interesting to see how people were incredibly optimistic about that. Thought maybe it was an end to the horrors that they'd seen before, and then it completely turned around, and like the torturing and the human rights neglect.
And that's an interesting human aside on this whole thing. I mean, realistically, because his wife is a British citizen and therefore his children are, there was talk of whether they could, obviously not him, but the wife and the children go to the UK, and whether they would be prosecuted or not for being accomplices in war crimes, etc. So it's just an interesting human side.
It's also a very different thing when they were in power. The fact that there were sanctions on him, but there wasn't on her. But that was when he was in a position of power, and he had the whole force of the country behind him. now he's not in that position of power. Maybe he has Russia as an alliance, but he's just another leader in exile, another billionaire leader in exile, hiding from the rest of the world. So it'd be interesting how the UK approaches that in itself.
And the new leader, he seems to be trying to rebrand himself as a kinder, a gentler person. He was interviewed on CNN, which was an interesting choice rather than Al Jazeera as his first thing. And he's adjusted what he's wearing, a la the Ukraine leader.
Yeah.
Wearing the green shirt and.
Yeah, I mean, that is really interesting. Like in pop culture, we always see rebrandings happen, like a lot, right? But people become an icon, some unsuccessful ones, Jojo Siwa, probably incredibly unsuccessful. But then there's someone like Addison Rae, who I'm sure my dad doesn't know what I'm talking about, who was a TikTok star, and now she's become this fairly successful musician. With the latest song she put out. It's amazing how you can, just using media and marketing, which you know a lot about, and how you present yourself and how you dress, you can completely change people's views of you. And I know that obviously this is a very different situation with al-Jilani, but he had at times been a member of Al-Qaeda. I think that he was in charge of one of the forces, the force which was within Syria, but then they both went their separate ways when he had disagreements with the rest of the leadership. Yeah, and the disagreements were meant to be about how they attack innocent civilians and how they attack the US and la la la. So, we hope that reflects a more human side of him, which is why he went separate ways. But I don't think these people are.
Well, that's the big fear, whether they will just continue as ISIS or whether they will he really care about the people and the leadership care about the people?
He's not within ISIS.
I know, but he's a fundamentalist. So the question is, will they implement solid and strict Sharia law along the lines of Afghanistan, or will it be a compromise, which is between a Western society and a Sharia law society? I mean, that's the big question, but it seems like if he's smart, and he seems to be a smart communicator, and clearly he's successful as a wartime leader to topple the regime in that short amount of time, he's obviously a very effective leader. So that's positive, but it will be fascinating because, as you pointed out, you've got the Kurds and you've got a third group in Syria, and it's about bringing those people together for some view of a common future. And the interesting thing is they probably should think about getting Turkey's help as well, because Turkey's right next door.
I mean, Turkey is their major supporter of this group, which, when I initially heard, I thought, oh God, that's not a good sign, because we all know that Erdogan isn't exactly the most reasonable person.
It's all relative.
To be around, okay, well, I would say he's not the most reasonable person, given the way he has incredibly close ties to Russia and
but compared to the
doesn't
Taliban
agree
leaders,
with the European.
But compared to the Taliban leaders in Afghanistan, I think he's reasonable.
Yeah, true. Okay, yeah, sure.
Because that's what potentially you could have here. You could have another Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, they were already in a pretty bad situation before. It's just that they weren't being governed by a religious government. And that was one of the main problems that a lot of these groups had with the Assad government, as well as like all the human rights violations. They had a problem that it wasn't following Sharia law, and that was one of the reasons they wanted to overturn it. So we'll see how religion plays a really important part in this going into the future. And yeah, hopefully Turkey will play a bigger role.
But Freddie, the bigger thing they had, I mean, of course that's an issue, but I read that more than 80% of Syrians are in poverty, right? I mean, the whole country is bankrupt and economically a basket case, and people's life is terrible, right? Not enough food, not enough housing.
It's what you'd expect when you've been in within a civil war space for many years.
True. That's true. And you think about the millions of Syrian refugees and how quickly some of those 5 million.
6.7 or something.
Yeah. How many of those refugees will return? And what do they return to, right? You've got to have a country that's functioning to absorb those people.
But it's a very different thing. This, I'll use a metaphor for this. It's like you have a really ugly building that's on the verge of collapse, right? You get rid of the building. the building is gone, but that doesn't mean you have any functional structure in place to support the foundation of a new government. It just means the dangerous building isn't there anymore. So it's really a very scary situation to be in right now. It could go in so many different directions.
It could.
And especially now that Syria is being seen as this, this battleground for all these new forces to gain power and snatch at it over the next few weeks. It's interesting how Israel has responded to that. We were having a little chat about this earlier, how obviously they've taken occupation of the Golan Heights area, which they have done in the past. They also declared that, what's that word again? I'm having a mind blank. In Ukraine, when Russia decided they wanted that section of land.
Oh, annexed.
Oh, yeah. They annexed that region, but the only other country that supported that was the US. And so now they're probably taking back what they believe is rightfully theirs. But I think a lot of international groups would not agree with that, with Israel again going into another country.
Well, I think you're right. But one of the challenges here, Syria has some of the biggest stockpiles of chemical weapons in the world. And so people are rightly concerned about those falling into
there are beliefs that they have the biggest stockpiles of chemical weapons.
That's what all the Western intelligence says, right? And in fact, Assad used those chemical weapons against his own people during the civil war.
Yeah.
And so the theory is that, Israel quite widely want to get rid of those stockpiles and ensure, because, it's right on the border with Israel.
I understand, but this is a thing we often come back to with us when we have conversations about things. There's one thing doing the right thing, and there's one thing just completely disregarding international law and the rights of a country to make its own decisions and the right of sovereignty itself. Just because one country is doing something you don't want them to do, you can't simply just invade the country and start destroying all the military bases. And I understand, obviously, they would be concerned about this unknown group coming to power and using their weapons against them. It's a very concerning possibility, and it's definitely something that could happen. And if they could remove them of all their weapons, especially chemical weapons, that would be a great thing. But I just think that it's an interesting time to be doing that. In the future, if Israel wanted to launch a heavier ground offensive into Syria, wouldn't it be a lot easier if all their military bases were completely defunct?
I don't think Israel has an intent to do that, darling. I think they're focused on self-preservation and protecting the Israeli
I agree, but
people.
how do you preserve yourself?
Well, the challenge is abiding by international law. This is moving so quickly, and there is an opportunity. There's a window of opportunity for them to deal with some of these threats quickly and effectively before the new regime comes into place. And if I'm living in Tel Aviv or something, I'm going to be pretty happy with my government doing that.
It just, over the past, few years or however long it's been, it just feels like Israel has found itself in this position. I mean, it has been in this position basically its entire existence, where they're terrified of every single country around it. And the only thing they can think to do is to launch numerous ground invasions into each country and start to weaken their own power sources. But that's not sustainable. They can't continue doing that. There's no way that they can lower the power of the entire Middle East and its entire surrounding.
You're right. I mean, think about how effective they were against Hezbollah. And Hezbollah's being weakened here is actually, in theory, part of the reason why Syria fell so quickly.
But there were many
Hezbollah was a big supporter of Syria.
Civilians who were hurt
I get it. But in the bigger strategic picture, in fact, this could have hastened the end of the Assad regime.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's very connected, like anything in the Middle East.
And the world.
Okay.
Everything is connected.
And Iran and Hezbollah support Syria, as does Russia. Okay, so
support the Assad regime.
The Assad regime,
not Syria itself. I also think we were talking about this a little bit the other day. The importance of not defining an entire country by their government's decisions. I think that's a really important discussion. We can talk about that at another point. But the fact that, all throughout history, we've said, oh, Germany has decided to do this. It's the leader of Germany. At that time, it would have been Hitler. Hitler's decided to do this. Israel has decided this. Netanyahu and his war government have decided to do this. And I think that takes away a lot of blame from the actual countries and these racist feelings almost towards different countries for the acts their governments have done. But not every person within the country is guilty.
I get it, but I think the test of this has been historically and even right up to today is, do the people put up with that long term, or do they revolt against that long term? Or often the criticisms of Germans from the Second World War is the people didn't speak up about it and didn't speak up about the atrocities, etc. But again, I mean, it's easy to talk about this stuff in hindsight when you're super scared of, in the German case, the SS, putting a bullet in your head. We've talked about it in terms of Gaza as well,
that's a very popular
Hamas
comparison.
and the people in Gaza not revolting against Hamas is astounding, right?
Yeah, well, but I'm not sure that's not the comparison that's typically used. You're just because this is a comparison that's all over the internet, the idea of what would you do in a Holocaust type situation, that comparison is used by pro-Palestine supporters to examine the world's reaction to what's happening in Gaza, not to examine the Gazan people's reaction, because they are in a position where they could die at any moment, right? They're just being targeted. It's difficult for them. It's more so looking at, if you were in France or in England at the time of the Holocaust and you had media and you knew every single atrocity that was happening to the Jewish people, what would you have done? Would you have done something? That's the comparison to today's Gaza.
Look, I get it. And I think it's all very easy when someone's sitting in their living room in Paris looking back on these things. But all I'm saying is, if you're in a war zone or if you're under some dictator and you're worried about your personal safety, it's all very well to be very brave in hindsight, etc., in a remote place. If you're in that situation, you may not be as brave.
Which is what I'm saying. This is why this comparison is so vital to what's happening right now. It's all very well to say, how could you have let those atrocities happen? How could these British people have just sat by and done nothing for such a long time? While Hitler built up all his strength, etc., invaded Austria, etc., did all of this stuff, and no one did anything.
Well, they thought they were going to placate him to avoid having.
Well, this is the same thing that's happening with Netanyahu, and it got to the point where no one is doing anything. The same thing that's happening
with Putin and Ukraine.
Yeah,
right?
No, exactly. I mean, but I think there's a bit of a stronger response to Ukraine.
Let's see what Trump does coming.
Yeah, no, Trump is one person. I think that's such an important distinction. It's not. I know you're just going to say something about the American people voting for him, but Trump is one person. Through whatever wild charisma that he has, he convinced them to vote for him. They're all in a pretty difficult position right now. The economy isn't doing well.
Which economy?
American economy.
Oh, no, it's doing fantastic.
No, in terms of quality of life.
Oh, in terms of inflation.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
The economic growth, etc. They're doing really well.
Yes,
they're leaders in the world.
That's all that matters, isn't it?
No, but the interesting thing with Trump with Syria, he said, "Don't talk to us about it. It's not America's problem, and it's their problem. They've got to fix it."
Which is interesting because that's what a lot of these groups have been wanting for a really long time. It's just for America to butt out.
Yeah, so they are.
Yeah. So it's why?
So let's see.
Why do you laugh? Why do you laugh? There's so many people's lives at stake. And it's also interesting how the world has responded to the fall of the Assad regime. You've heard about this, how a lot of developed countries are now rejecting refugee applications by Syrian nationals.
So it's rather quick to move to that.
Very quick to move when you still have absolutely no idea what's happening within their country. And most of the country is still not being controlled by one group. It's rather ridiculous to suddenly, and they've just been through a significant amount of conflict. The whole act of taking over a country and staging like a rebellion against the pre-existing government is quite violent.
I know, but as you know, these governments, Western governments around the world, are paranoid about their borders. They're under threat of being voted out of office, etc. So it's probably a good segue for us to move back closer to home and talk about Labour falling in the polls more recently, which is super interesting. What do you think about that?
I mean, again, I was quite scared when I first looked at some of the polls. Some of them show Labour very negatively and some are a bit more balanced. I think one said 33%, with Liberals at like 46%. And another said Labour at 39%, with Liberals at 43% or something like this. So, you know, it still could end up being tight, you would hope. But I think that Labour's doing a lot of what it can do. We're going to see what happens in the campaign.
The interesting thing for me, I read a stat that 59% of Australians feel worse off than they did 4 years ago, which is high, right? And so if that follows the US thing, Dutton will potentially win, or the Liberal Party will potentially win. The challenge they have is I don't think they'll win back the teal seats. So therefore they have to really go a bit more right to win back all the country seats and Queensland, etc., and Western Sydney seats. And again, the whole Israel Gaza conflict in Australia, which is getting quite violent, you know, with the synagogue being bombed in Melbourne.
The effects of
and you see Dutton is in a sense weaponizing that, saying Albanese has been way too slow to act on that whole thing. So again, that will be really fascinating how that plays out in terms of the electorate.
Yeah, no, it definitely will be. I'm fairly sure the synagogue wasn't bombed; it was set alight.
Oh, okay, set alight.
It's a very big difference.
Well, it's destroyed.
Okay, yes, yeah, but a bomb, you know, is different to an arson attack. So of course, yeah, no, that was horrific. And Albanese, I did see he addressed it almost straight away, and the response from Labor did seem quite effective and genuine. And all of the politicians have been condemning it, of course, as they have to. And the Liberals haven't necessarily done anything better than that. But it's just the media, right? And they have to just fight against Trumpism and that whole mindset of just pushing to the right. And
well, that's Dutton's line, is the Prime Minister is weak.
Yeah, I think that's what Labor needs to fight against.
Yeah.
This is their main thing. They need to think about their policies, but everyone knows they have good policies. They've done well while they've been in office.
Labor, yeah. They
need to fight against this preconceived idea that they are weak. They need to fight against this very catchy quote, are you better than you were 4 years ago? They need to fight against that, and they really need to get it into people's heads that there is a difference between effective policy making and the cost of living right now. You know, there are lots of external causes, which is why everyone's in this position right now, obviously.
But remember, people vote with their hip pockets.
They do vote with their pockets,
but trumps everything else.
They need to be told how good the economy has been doing.
Yes, you're right.
In comparison to what it would have been if the Liberals had been in power.
Yes, and the question is the electorate listening? That's the big question.
Yeah,
so, and, you know, I do think the Labor Party has done a good job with their action on climate change relative to the coalition. And so now the latest topic is, should we have nuclear or not have nuclear? What does your generation think about that?
The latest topic. I mean, I think this is the one thing holding up Dutton's campaign at the moment. I haven't really heard anything else from him on what he's planning on putting into policy when he gets into power. It's just the $600 million or $600 billion nuclear plan. $600 billion nuclear plan. I know that CSIRO came out the other day saying that it's definitely not a viable option if you're comparing it.
Well, they said it's possible, but
double the cost. It's possible, but it's not an option if you're thinking about the economy and what it's going to cost the Australian people. And that's what Dutton has been claiming it is. So CSIRO came out and said that that's a false statement, and that's not true. It's nice to see someone looking over all that right now in the news. I'm not entirely sure how my generation feels. I mean, I think most people are not that supportive of nuclear. I think it's safe to say the Australian public isn't that supportive of nuclear. I can see a situation in the future where we may have to rely on it at some point, but now is not the time. And we all know that when Dutton says nuclear, he means get into office, ramp up coal and everything else, and maybe do a few nuclear reactors here and there.
Long term.
Yeah. He doesn't mean straight away. So
you're saying he's using it as a wedge with Labor, right?
Yeah, I definitely think he is. An excuse to not keep developing renewables as well.
Right. And I agree with you that I think long term we probably will have some small nuclear reactors. I mean, it was interesting the other day that Google has bought the rights to 3 Mile Island, one of the biggest nuclear plants in the US, for all their AI data centers, etc. Because as AI develops, the need for energy is going to be enormous. And of course, you want renewables to do that, but you might need a few small nuclear reactors. And again, this is a challenge for Labor because a part of their party constitution is not to have any nuclear in any circumstance. And so it's really interesting whether they're able to change that at any point. So nuclear plus, then they'd get into arguments with the Greens. It's super complicated, which is why the Liberal Party is using this as a wedging thing with Labor and the Greens, right? And so I do think that Labor has to really focus on what they've done. And it'll be interesting to see how the electorate responds to it. But what do you think about those teal seats? Do you think the Liberal Party can win those back?
Well, actually, just before we get into that, I wanted to say one more thing about nuclear. I can understand how Labor, of course, and the Greens are incredibly wary and incredibly against nuclear, because in the past I have been like that as well. But I think in recent years I've done a lot more research into it. There was that really great Bill Gates documentary that he put out, and it was just talking about how this idea of nuclear energy as this apocalypse, this cause of the next apocalypse, generating all sorts of dangerous outputs and stuff like this. That's a very old-fashioned idea. That was when they were using
1960s
technology. Like a wooden switch to turn it on, and a few guys in hazmat suits to make sure it was okay. But when you think about the advancement of AI even, and technology in general, the capacity we have to manage nuclear is much safer than it used to be. And I would encourage you all your listeners to go and really look into that if you're a bit wary of it, because there's been a lot of advancements and a lot of things that most people haven't thought about that much. So
no, you're quite right. And these small nuclear reactors are regarded as incredibly safe versus, this old technology where we've had nuclear disasters, i.e. 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, etc. Again, all 1960s technology with valves and dials and such. And so you can make things far more fail-proof. And if you think about Australia, our vast areas inland, etc., for these places. But anyway, the Liberal Party has designated locations where these nuclear reactors will be. And again, that will be fascinating, those electorates, what the response is to those people in the
or something.
No, I think it was a joke. That was
probably a joke
on Albo for his local electorate. But it'll be very interesting, the not in my backyard scenario.
My backyard. No, that's very true. And then I guess moving on to the teal seats, I don't think that Liberal or Labor has any hope of winning back the teal seats. I think they've all done an incredible job, and all the communities are really proud and impressed by them. The only thing which has happened in our local electorate, which is quite fascinating itself, is that the Australian Electoral Commission decided North Sydney was not a viable electoral seat to have anymore, because the population growth wasn't accelerating enough to support it having its own seat. So we have now been filtered into Warringah, which means our local representative has now decided to leave Parliament and not try and run again within the seat, which has now become Warringah. Or is it Bradfield?
No, we have joined Warringah.
But she has joined...
No. North Sydney has been split into Warringah, Bennelong, and what's called Bradfield.
What has Kylie Tink joined? That's what I'm saying.
She hasn't joined any. She's just... she will be in Warringah.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. But so that's interesting in itself, just to see how all of this is so arbitrary, it's decided by the lines in which we live, not even the communities, but just a bizarre.
But that's good in a way. That's all based on data, right?
It is based on data.
And remember, one of the big advantages we have as democracy, compulsory voting and our electoral commission.
Yeah, definitely.
So don't diss the electoral commission.
I'm not dissing it at all. It's just a fascinating thing, because I feel as if we hold so much identity with the people that we vote for and who represents us. And it's interesting how that can just change at a drop of a hat.
Based on the data.
it reminds you have all of these things. Even sovereignty of a country is just a thing that was decided on. It's an international norm that was decided on a long time ago. And it's interesting to look at that, especially as the world is changing so much and, conflicts are happening left, right, and center, and new people are being put into power, and people are having satellite leaders and all of this stuff. It really shows you how nothing is set in stone and anything can change at a moment's notice.
It's true. Very true. Well, that's probably a good point to finish, Freddie.
Yeah, I think so.
Great to chat with you. Hope you all are enjoying these episodes, and we will see you again next week.
Great
Bye.
speaking to you. Bye.